She asked it quietly. The way you ask a question when you already know the answer and are buying yourself one more second to decide whether you actually want to say the thing waiting behind it. I was awake. I had been awake for 43 minutes. The sleeping bag was barely wide enough for one person, and Nora Hayes was lying 4 inches from my shoulder, completely still. In a way that no sleeping person ever actually lies still. She wasn't sleeping. I wasn't sleeping. We both knew it. And up until that moment, we had both been pretending with real commitment. "Are you awake?" I should have said no. Instead, I said yes, and the word barely had time to land before the whole thing changed. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 34. I design residential furniture. Custom pieces for people who have strong opinions about wood grain and don't like being told how long the waiting list is. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment with a coffee machine I understand better than most people and a reading chair that has survived 3 apartments and 1 brief, inadvisable relationship. I'm told I overthink. I prefer to call it running quality control on decisions before I make them. The problem is that quality control has never worked correctly around Nora. Her name was Nora Hayes. She was 32. She managed a small independent bookshop, which meant she worked 60-hour weeks for a salary that made my furniture clients look at her with a specific kind of pity she could not have cared less about. She had dark hair that she wore in the same low knot every day, a green enamel pin on her work bag shaped like a fern. She claimed it was ironic. I had my doubts, and a habit of reading the last page of a book before she bought it, not to spoil it, to decide if it had earned her time. She was the most infuriating system of evaluating worthiness I had ever encountered, and I had been her best friend for 6 years. We met at a trivia night at a bar I hadn't chosen, an event I'd been dragged to by a mutual friend who disappeared 20 minutes in. Nora and I ended up at the same table, assigned by strangers. The question was about architecture. I answered before she did. She told me I was wrong. I told her I wasn't. She pulled out her phone and looked it up, still believing she was going to prove something, and then set the phone down without saying another word. I bought her a drink anyway. She pretended it hadn't happened. We talked until the bar closed. The existing dynamic was that we were best friends, had been for 6 years. We had the kind of friendship that other people looked at and said, with varying degrees of subtlety, "Really?" And we had spent 6 years saying yes, really, without too much visible effort. She came to my apartment when her landlord didn't fix things. I called her when a piece I'd been building for 3 months didn't come out right. She still brought the fern pin everywhere. I still didn't ask about it. The thing I told myself was simple. Some friendships are worth more than whatever you think you might be feeling on a Tuesday when her shoulder brushes yours in a cinema. Nora was irreplaceable. Anything else was a risk I wasn't built for. The camping trip was her idea. It was the second weekend of September. Her plan had been a group trip, 4 of us, a campsite 2 hours north, 2 nights under stars that were invisible from the city. What actually happened was that our friend Marcus pulled out Thursday with a work emergency, and our friend Priya canceled Friday morning with what she described, accurately, as a profound disinclination to sleep outside, which left Nora and me a booked campsite, non-refundable permits, and the specific kind of social inertia that makes 2 people go ahead with a trip they might have reconsidered if they'd had more time. The drive up was fine. The setup was fine. The smell of wood smoke came through the trees before we even got the tent stakes in. We made dinner over a camp stove with the manic efficiency of 2 people pretending the situation is completely normal, which it was. We sat by the fire until after 11, talking about nothing important, her regulars at the bookshop, a dining table I was behind on, the mutual friend from the trivia night who'd never quite recovered from accidentally introducing us. It was the right kind of nothing. Easy and old and warm, in the way that things are warm, when they've been yours long enough. The problem presented itself when it was time to sleep. There was one tent, one sleeping bag, the high-quality one Priya had lent us, wide enough for 2 people if those 2 people didn't mind a particular kind of closeness in mid-September, at altitude. There was a second sleeping bag that turned out, when unrolled, to have a broken zip and a smell I could not identify and declined to investigate further. "I'm not sleeping in that," Nora said. "That's fair." So, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read in the firelight. I was running quality control on approximately 17 different responses simultaneously. None of them were appropriate. "We've known each other for 6 years, she said. Statement, not argument. "We have. It's a sleeping bag." "It is." We got into the sleeping bag. She had her back to me. I stared at the tent ceiling 12 inches from my face and told myself this was a completely reasonable thing that 2 adults who had been best friends for 6 years could do without incident. That was when I noticed she wasn't breathing the way a person breathes when they're relaxed. Neither was I. I lay there for 40 minutes cataloging her almost stillness, the way I catalog grain patterns on a piece of wood I haven't decided what to make yet. The temperature had dropped another 2 degrees. Through the tent fabric, the trees made a sound that wasn't quite wind and wasn't quite anything else. I was aware of the 4 inches between my shoulder and hers with a precision that would have been embarrassing to admit under any other circumstances. I thought about the first time I'd noticed it. Not the feeling. I think I'd been aware of that in some low-level way for longer than I wanted to count. The first time I noticed, I was actively working to not notice it. It was a Wednesday evening, about 8 months ago. She'd come over because the radiator in her apartment had been making a sound she described as architecturally threatening, and she hadn't wanted to be alone with it. We'd watched something I couldn't tell you anything about now and ordered from the Thai place we both liked, and at some point she'd fallen asleep sitting up against my shoulder with her book open in her lap and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and I had stayed completely still for 40 minutes, so I didn't wake her. When she did wake up, too fast, blinking, immediately embarrassed, she said sorry, and I said for what, and she said I don't know. And we left it there. But after she went home, I sat in the reading chair doing nothing for a while, which is not something I do, and I understood that the 40 minutes of not moving had not been out of consideration. It had been something else. And I filed that information in the category of things I was not going to think about. I am not, it turns out, very good at that category. The following month we were at her shop after closing. She was reorganizing a display, and I had no good reason to be there except that she'd called, and I'd gone, which was a pattern I had never examined too closely. A customer knocked on the glass, a man about our age, and Nora opened the door to explain they were closed, and they talked for a few minutes about a book he was looking for. And at one point he said something that made her laugh, and the laugh came out wrong, slightly off key. She found the book. She sent him on his way. After she closed the door, she went back to her shelf without comment. I watched her for a moment. She was straightening a row of spines with more precision than the task required. "You could have let him in," I said. "We're closed." He seemed like he'd have been happy to wait. She set a book down too hard, just slightly. I wasn't interested. She didn't look at me when she said it. I let it go. I was good at letting things go that I had no business pursuing. It's practically a talent. 3 months later came her sister's wedding. I'd been her +1 because she'd ended a relationship in June and didn't want to navigate the cousins alone. This was not unusual. We had done versions of this before. And I had no feelings about it that I was prepared to acknowledge. There was a moment during the reception, late in the evening, when she was standing near the edge of the dance floor watching her sister turn slow circles with her husband. I came to stand beside her. The song was something I didn't know. The whole room smelled of cut flowers and the specific warmth that comes from 100 people and too many candles. She said, without looking at me, "When it's right, how do you know?" I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "I don't think you know. I think you just run out of reasons to keep pretending you don't." She turned and looked at me. A look I couldn't categorize, which was notable. I had a fairly complete taxonomy of her expressions by that point. There weren't many I didn't have filed. This one was new. Or not new. Just one I hadn't let myself read correctly before. Someone called her name from across the room. The moment closed. I blamed the candles. This was not accurate. It was accurate as a short-term filing strategy, and I am not above those. Then, 3 weeks before the camping trip, she called me at 11 on a Tuesday. I answered thinking something had happened. She said nothing's wrong. Then she was quiet for a long moment. I asked what she was thinking about. She said, "Probably something I shouldn't say yet." I said, "Okay." She said good night, and I lay in the dark afterward with the phone on my chest and told myself it was probably work-related, which was the comforting version, not the accurate one. She'd been holding on to something. I'd known it. I just hadn't let myself know it out loud. Because knowing it out loud meant making a decision, and I had spent 6 years making the decision to not make that decision, which is, admittedly, its own kind of choice. And now she was 4 inches from my shoulder, in a tent in September, at altitude, not sleeping. And the thing she'd been holding was still there between us. The weight of it just heavy enough that we could both feel it, without saying what it was. Something in my chest did something quiet. Not dramatically. Just enough to confirm what quality control had been misclassifying for months. Then she asked, "Are you awake?" I lay there for one more second in the specific suspended quality of a moment before it changes, and I thought about 6 years of knowing exactly how she took her coffee and 40 minutes of not waking her, and a look I hadn't let myself read correctly at a wedding, and a phone call at 11 on a Tuesday, when she'd said probably something I shouldn't say yet. I thought about what I'd told her on that dance floor. You just run out of reasons to keep pretending you don't. I appeared to have run out of reasons. "I need to tell you something," she said, still facing away from me. "And I need you to not make it weird. I have poor survival instincts around Hayes women. This is documented." "Okay," I said. "I've been trying to say this for about 3 months, and I've talked myself out of it every time, because there are several very good reasons why I shouldn't. Several. Don't count them. Don't do the counting thing." I stopped doing the counting thing. She still hadn't turned around. Her fingers were wrapped around her own arm, and from where I was lying I could see her knuckles whiten once and then release. That got a small, invisible smile from me that she couldn't see. "I had a plan," she said. "I was going to wait for a right moment. Something with context. Not a tent." Noted. "But I've been lying here for 40 minutes, not sleeping, and I think I'm running out of nights where I could have just said it." That sentence did something quiet to the room. She went still. Actually still this time. Then she said, "I changed your name in my phone about 8 months ago, from Daniel to something else, and I keep going to change it back and I can't, and that's the thing I keep not saying." I lay there. "What did you change it to?" I asked. A pause. "A real one. Mine," she said. Very quietly, like the word had been sitting behind her teeth for months and had slipped out before pride could catch it. just mine. The tent was very small. I had been aware of this for 2 hours, but it became a different kind of small when she said that. I lay there and let the word sit. Mine, just that. No qualifier. No careful scaffolding around it to make it sound like something smaller. I understood what she meant. Not mine as in property. Mine as in the thing your hands know before your head admits it. Mine as in the instinct that keeps coming back no matter how many reasonable explanations you filed it under. She heard herself say it after she'd already said it. I felt her tense beside me, her shoulders going fractionally up, her breath briefly held, like she was waiting to see if the ceiling would fall. It didn't. You don't have to say anything, I said, carefully, into the dark. We can sleep, and in the morning I'll be the one who makes the coffee, and we won't. We can just not, if that's the easier version. She was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than most moments. Then, she turned over. It was dark, but there was enough light coming through the tent fabric that I could see her face. She had the expression of a woman who has decided something and is not retreating from it. The same one I'd seen at a trivia night 6 years ago, when she set a phone down without a word and bought nothing. And that was probably the moment I should have understood. I don't want to not, she said. Nora, 6 years, she said. You're the person I call. Both kinds, the good news and the 3am. Every person I've dated in the last 4 years, I've introduced to you first, not for your approval. Because if you didn't like them, it mattered to me more than it should have. And I told myself that was just friendship, I said. Yes, that, I've been telling myself that. So have I. Have you? It wasn't a question. She was watching me in the half-dark with her head slightly tilted, the way she assessed things she wasn't sure about yet. Every person I dated, I said, lasted until we had one of those evenings that goes until 2am about nothing important. And then I'd drive home and sit in the car in my parking space and think, why does that feel like the right version? Why does everything else feel like I'm performing? And I'd talk myself out of it because I didn't want to lose the friendship, she said. Didn't want to lose you. There's a difference. I paused. The friendship I could have rebuilt eventually. You, I couldn't. She held my gaze a second longer than felt safe. Then, she didn't look away. When something good happened, I said, you were who I wanted to tell first. Not second. Not after I'd figured out how to present it. You were the reason it became real. Because until I'd told you, it hadn't fully happened yet. When something went wrong, still you. At the wedding, when you asked how you know when something's right, I meant what I said. You just run out of reasons to pretend you don't. I've been running out for a while. I just kept finding new reasons until I stopped. Until a tent, she said. Until a tent. Her fingers found mine, not dramatically, just a quiet, certain thing in the dark, the kind that has already made up its mind. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I know. I mean from this. I'm not going anywhere from this. I understood exactly what she meant. I shifted closer. She didn't move back. Outside, something in the trees rustled, bird or wind, impossible to know, and then it was quiet again. Your name in my phone, I said, has been Hey for 3 years. She stared at me. Hey, as in, hey. What you say when you see the person. She laughed. It came out startled and genuine and a little helpless, and she turned her face into my shoulder like she was hiding from her own reaction. I kissed her hair. She went still in the way people go still, when something they weren't expecting turns out to be exactly what they wanted, and then she lifted her head. It was gentle. It was chosen. There was nothing in it that hadn't already been decided. From outside the tent, distinctly, a bird made a sound like it was personally offended by the timing. Nora pulled back and looked at me. Was that a yes? She pressed her face back into my shoulder and shook with laughter, and I lay there with my arm around her, thinking, there it is. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding. 3 months later, she still hadn't changed the name back. I asked her on a Saturday morning what it actually said now. She looked at her phone, then at me. Ours, she said. I didn't have anything to add that was going to improve on that, so I went back to making the coffee. A year after that, I built her a bookshelf, custom, floor to ceiling, the kind of thing her shop rented out for window displays. I put it in the apartment because she'd been talking about one for 2 years. She came to see it on a Thursday evening, touched the wood the way she touched things she liked, quietly, appraisingly, running her fingers along the grain. The fern pin was still on her bag. I still didn't ask about it. Well, she said. Well, I said. She looked at me over her shoulder with that expression I'd been cataloging for 6 years and only recently allowed myself to understand. Took you long enough. I wasn't sure if she meant the shelf or the other thing. With Nora, it was often both at once. Years later, when people asked how we got together, she said, we were camping. He said yes, and I turned over. She made it sound simple because she knew it would make me smile, and because from her side of the sleeping bag, maybe it was. My version was longer, involved more quality control than was strictly useful, and ended in the same place. It was late. Late in the best possible way. What would you have done if your best friend turned to you in the dark and asked, knowing you'd both been awake the whole time? And have you ever run out of nights to say something you'd been holding back too long? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.